Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
Big news dropped June 4th, 2025. President Trump issued a proclamation restricting entry quite significantly from 19 different countries.
Yeah, and if you remember his first term...
It definitely sounds familiar, doesn't it? Echoes those earlier travel bans.
Exactly. It's complex, sparked a lot of debate right away, analysis flying everywhere.
Absolutely, and that's why we're doing this deep dive, right?
Precisely. We've got a whole stack of materials here. Reports from different groups, legal takes, news articles, and the White House's own documents explaining their side.
Yeah, the official justification.
Our goal here is really to cut through all that noise, give you, the listener, a clear, informed picture of what this policy actually is.
Think of it as, your quick guide. We want you to grasp the key details, the administration's stated reasons, who gets affected, and what different sources are saying the fallout might be.
So let's jump right in.
Okay, the nuts and bolts. What specifically happened on June 4th? What did that proclamation do?
So June 4th, President Trump signed Proclamation 1142. The official title is quite long, something like restricting the entry of foreign nationals to protect the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public safety threats.
Catchy.
Yeah. And legally, the administration is leaning on the president's authority under Sections 212F and 215A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA.
Right, 212, that's the key one, isn't it? Same legal basis as before.
It is, and the Supreme Court connection is critical here, as the sources point out.
They ruled on that power already.
They did, yeah. In Trump v. Hawaii back in 2018, the court basically upheld the president's authority under 212F. Legal analyses say the ruling gave significant deference to the president on immigration and national security.
So the court said the previous ban was based on legitimate purposes.
That's the language they used, yes. So this new 2025 proclamation is standing on that same legal ground previously validated by the highest court.
Got it. Same tool, new application. When did this one kick in?
The effective date was set for June 9th, 2025 at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, so a few days' notice.
Right. And some commentators noted that it's different from the very sudden rollout in 2017. Maybe less immediate confusion at airports this time?
Maybe. Okay, let's talk about who this actually targets. The sources mentioned two different levels, two tiers of restrictions.
That's right. It's not a blanket ban on all 19 countries equally. The administration says their assessment led to different levels based on the country.
So tier 1, the most restrictive.
Yes. That's a near-complete visa ban for nationals from 12 countries.
And those countries are?
Okay, let's list them. Afghanistan, Burma, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen.
12 countries.
Right. So if you're from one of those places, you're outside the U.S., and you don't already have a valid visa, this ban restricts both immigrant visas, people wanting to move here permanently, and basically all non-immigrant visas, too. Tourism, business, study, mostly blocked.
Wow. So for those 12, it's a very broad shutdown on entry unless you fit a very specific exception.
Exactly. It's a comprehensive barrier for nationals of those 12 countries trying to come in.
Okay, what about the second tier?
That covers 7 other countries: Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela.
And the restrictions are different for them.
Yeah, they're described as partial restrictions. It mainly targets immigrant visas, so limiting permanent immigration. And then it hits specific types of non-immigrant or temporary visas.
Which temporary visas are restricted for that second group?
The proclamation names B1 for business, B2 for tourism, and the combined B1, B2. Also F&M visas for students and J visas for exchange visitors.
Okay, so business, tourism, students, exchange visitors mainly blocked. What about other temporary visas, like work visas?
Generally, things like H-1B skilled worker visas or L-1 company transfers aren't directly banned for this second group of 7 countries, but...
There's always a but.
Right. The proclamation tells consular officers they can reduce the validity period, shorten how long the visa is good for any other non-immigrant visas they do issue to people from these 7 countries.
Ah, okay, so even if your visa type isn't banned outright, say, for work, you might get a visa that's only valid for a much shorter time if you're from one of those 7 nations.
That seems to be the idea, yeah. Adds another layer of restriction. Now, a really crucial point the sources emphasize is who this doesn't automatically apply to.
Right. Who is not covered?
It only applies to foreign nationals from these 19 countries who are outside the U.S. on June 9th and who don't already have a valid visa issued before that date.
So if someone from, say, Yemen was already legally inside the U.S. on June 8th, or had a valid visa issued before June 9th, but was maybe traveling outside the U.S. when it kicked in.
Their existing valid visa is not automatically revoked by this proclamation. Sources like Legal Analyses are clear on that.
Okay, that's important. No retroactive cancellation of existing visas.
Correct. However, and this is a big however, if someone who is legally in the U.S. from one of these countries travels abroad after June 9th,
They might have trouble getting back in.
they absolutely could, yeah. If they need a new visa to return or even face inspection at the border under these new rules, their reentry could be blocked. That's a major concern raised.
Okay. And what about people from these countries already inside the U.S., maybe applying for a green card or changing their status? Like someone here on a student visa applying to stay permanently.
That's another key detail, particularly highlighted in legal analyses like the one from Bond, Shonik, and King, because the ban comes under INA 212, which governs entry from abroad.
It doesn't directly control what happens inside the U.S.
Exactly. It doesn't stop USCIS, the agency handling applications inside the U.S., from processing things like adjustment of status for people already lawfully present. Their nationality alone can't be the sole reason for denial if they're applying from within the U.S.
But again, if they leave,
all bets are off regarding reentry. So the advice seems to be, if you're from one of these countries and are inside the U.S., traveling internationally becomes very risky.
got it, primarily a border restriction.
Yeah.
Are there any other major exceptions written into the proclamation itself?
Yes, there are several important ones listed. Lawful permanent residents, green card holders are exempt. Anyone with a valid visa issued before June 9th. Certain visa types like diplomatic visas are okay.
What else?
Athletes and teams coming for big international events like the World Cup or Olympics. Immediate family immigrant visa applicants, but they might need strong proof like DNA evidence, adoptees.
Okay.
And also, importantly, special immigrant visa holders, SIVs from Afghanistan and Iraq who helped the U.S. government. And there's an exception for certain persecuted ethnic and religious minorities from Iran who already have immigrant visas.
All right, that gives us a really solid understanding of the what and the who of the ban, including those important nuances. Now let's shift to the why. What's the administration's official rationale? Why do they say this is necessary?
Okay, so the White House fact sheet, the proclamation text itself, they frame this entirely as essential for national security and public safety.
Based on some kind of review.
Yes, they say it's based on a robust assessment by national security agencies, which was apparently triggered by an executive order from earlier in 2025.
And what specific problems or threats did that assessment supposedly find in these 19 countries?
The documents lay out several core concerns. A big one is what they call inadequate screening, vetting, or information sharing.
Meaning
Meaning the administration claims some of these countries lack reliable authorities or processes for identity documents, or they aren't cooperative. This makes it hard, they argue, for the U.S. to properly vet visa applicants and assess potential risks.
So the U.S. is saying we can't trust the info we're getting, basically.
That's a key part of the argument, yes. And they explicitly say that improving this information sharing is a way countries could potentially get off the list.
Okay, what else?
A second major reason cited is high visa overstay rates.
People staying after their temporary visas expire.
Exactly. The White House points to DHS data. They claim nationals from some listed countries remain illegally at unacceptably high rates.
Did they give specific numbers in the documents?
They did. The proclamation includes specific figures as justification. For instance, it says Chad had a B1, B2, that's business tourist, overstay rate of nearly 50%, 49.54% in FY23.
Wow.
And it was over 37% the year before. Equatorial Guinea is cited for an FMJ student exchange visitor overstay rate of over 70%, 70.18% in FY23.
70%. That's a huge number they're highlighting.
It is, and the administration uses these stats to argue it shows a blatant disregard for United States immigration laws by nationals of some of these countries.
Okay, vetting issues, overstays. What else?
Third, some countries are labeled recalcitrant nations.
Meaning they won't take people back.
Right. They refuse to cooperate with the U.S. in repatriating their own nationals who've been ordered deported from the U.S. This, the administration says, hampers immigration enforcement.
Makes sense from an enforcement perspective. And the fourth big reason, probably the most prominent one.
Significant terrorist presence, or state-sponsored terrorism. This is central to the national security argument.
Which countries are highlighted there?
They point to specific risks. Iran, designated a state sponsor of terrorism. Afghanistan, controlled by the Taliban, which the U.S. deems a terrorist group. Somalia, called a terrorist safe haven. Cuba, also listed as a state sponsor of terrorism and cited for poor law enforcement cooperation.
So they're linking specific countries to terrorism threats directly.
Yes. The White House stresses that their assessment looked at all these country-specific factors: terror links, overstays, vetting problems, lack of cooperation to tailor the restrictions. It wasn't just one thing across the board.
So boiling it down, the administration's case is this is a necessary targeted response to documented risks and lack of cooperation, aimed at protecting Americans, enforcing laws, and pushing these specific foreign governments to shape up.
That's the essence of their justification, yes. They also mention distinguishing risks between immigrants and non-immigrants, arguing permanent residents could pose a greater long-term risk if security issues pop up later because they're harder to remove.
Okay, very clear picture of the administration's stated rationale from their sources. But obviously, a policy like this generates huge waves. Let's turn to the potential impacts and the very different perspectives from other sources. What's the potential scale here? How many people might this affect?
The numbers are potentially quite large. Analyses from immigration groups, news reports looking at visa data, they suggest this could block at least 34,000 immigrant visas annually.
34,000 families hoping to immigrate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And potentially over 125,000 non-immigrant visas, temporary visitors, students, etc., each year, based on 2023 figures.
Those are big numbers. Any sense of how many people usually travel from these countries?
Well, just for context, look at 2022 data. Over 363,000 people from these 19 countries entered the U.S. legally that year. So while the ban is forward-looking, that shows the level of existing travel and connection. And the total population of these 19 countries combined is massive, over 475 million people.
And we know significant communities from these places already live here in the U.S.
Absolutely. Sources mention around 4.3 million people from these 19 countries living in the U.S. in 2023, and about 2.4 million of those are already naturalized U.S. citizens.
So how does a ban like this hit those communities already here?
That's a huge concern raised by critics. Family separation is a major one. It becomes incredibly hard, maybe impossible, for people here, legally citizens, green card holders, to bring certain relatives over from these countries.
Right.
But it goes beyond just bringing new people in. Sources talk about a chilling effect.
Meaning people here are afraid to leave.
Exactly. People legally in the U.S. from these countries might become too scared to travel abroad, even for emergencies like a funeral, because they fear they won't be let back in under the new rules, even with a valid visa. That can cause immense stress and painful separations.
So the impact ripples outwards,
Well,
affecting those already integrated here. What about economic effects?
Yeah, analyses definitely point to potential economic disruption. Restricting travel, even temporary business travel, or certain workers not explicitly banned but maybe getting shorter visas, that could hurt international business, supply chains, academic collaborations.
And the communities here already contribute economically, right?
Significantly. Sources cite data showing households with members from these countries contributed $3.2 billion in income in 2023, paid over $715 million in taxes, and had $2.5 billion in spending power. Blocking future arrivals could chip away at that over time.
Okay, so clear worries about humanitarian, family, and economic impacts. What are the discrimination arguments? That always comes up with these kinds of policies.
It's absolutely central for critics like Human Rights First. They argue that targeting people based only on their nationality is fundamentally discriminatory. It undermines fairness and equal treatment principles.
And they draw parallels to the earlier ban.
Explicitly. Critics call it a continuation of policies targeting specific nationalities, linking it to the previous ban, often labeled a Muslim ban. They argue that even though this list isn't only Muslim-majority countries, the principle of national origin discrimination remains, which they see as xenophobic.
Okay. Now, the administration's core justification is national security terrorism, overstays, vetting. How do critics push back on that specific argument?
That's where sources like the Christian Science Monitor article bring in challenging perspectives. They quote experts like Alex Nowrasteh from the Cato Institute.
What does he say?
He argues the actual threat from foreign-born terrorism and crime from these specific 19 countries is manageable and small.
Small, based on what?
He points to historical data looking at nearly 50 years, from 1975 to 2024. In that entire period, he says, only one person who committed a fatal terrorist attack on U.S. soil was from any of the 19 countries now on this ban list.
Wait, hang on. One person in almost 50 years from all 19 of these countries combined.
That's the statistic presented by critics using his analysis.
That number if accurate, seems to fundamentally question the administration's claim of a significant terrorist presence justifying such a wide ban.
That's precisely the point those critics are making. They argue the empirical evidence of actual past attacks just doesn't align with the scale of this ban if the goal is preventing terrorism. It directly challenges the core security rationale.
Okay. Beyond terrorism, what about impacts on universities, on academic freedom? That relies so much on international exchange.
Yeah, the Inside Higher Ed article really digs into this. It features voices like Isaac Kamala from the American Association of University Professors.
And their concern is?
They argue the ban and related government scrutiny poses a threat to academic freedom and the U.S.'s role as a global hub for research and ideas. The article gives examples.
Like what?
Cases where foreign scholars or students, sometimes even from countries not on the ban list but caught in this wider net of scrutiny, have allegedly been detained, denied entry, or faced visa problems based on their political views or associations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The article mentions a Georgetown fellow from India reportedly detained over alleged pro-Palestinian activities. A Lebanese professor at Brown who said he was denied re-entry after attending a funeral, accused of having sympathetic photos on his phone. Even an unnamed French scientist supposedly denied entry because their phone contained personal opinions critical of administration research policy.
Wow. So the concern is that immigration tools are being used to chill free speech.
That's the argument from critics in the article, yes. That it could intimidate foreign academics and students, hindering the open exchange universities depend on.
But I imagine there's another side to that argument, too.
There is. The same article quotes Teresa Manning from the National Association of Scholars. She frames these incidents differently.
How so?
She sees them less as academic freedom issues and more as an issue of security and safety. Her perspective is that the priority has to be national security, even if it sometimes affects academic activities.
So even within the academic impact discussion, you have these competing frames. The threat to freedom versus necessary security. It really highlights the different lenses people view this through. What about reactions from the countries actually on the list?
It's been a mix. According to sources like the BBC and Al Jazeera, Chad, under the full ban, reacted very strongly.
Wow.
They immediately suspended issuing visas to U.S. citizens, called it a reciprocal move, citing dignity and pride.
Ouch. Others.
Somalia and Sierra Leone reportedly expressed more willingness to cooperate with the U.S. to address the concerns Washington raised. Venezuela's government warned about risks of being in the U.S.
And broader international bodies.
The African Union voiced concern about the impact on U.S.-Africa relations, calling for dialogue and an evidence-based approach. The UN Human Rights Chief also raised concerns about proportionality and potential discrimination under international law.
So a real range defiance, cooperation, concern, warnings shows the diplomatic whipples.
Definitely. It's not just a domestic U.S. policy. It has immediate international consequences.
Okay, we've covered a huge amount here. The policy details, the administration's reasoning, the counter-arguments, the potential impacts on people, families, the economy, academia, and global relations. What's the core tension we're left with?
I think this deep dive really lays bare that fundamental conflict. On one side, you have the administration arguing for robust security measures based on country-specific risks, vetting gaps, overstays, non-cooperation, terrorism concerns.
Right, the government's duty to protect.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have powerful arguments from critics about the deep human cost, families separated, opportunities denied, concerns about economic harm, damage to institutions like universities, and fundamental questions about fairness, discrimination, and whether the scale of the policy actually matches the scale of the proven threat.
And it's all happening on a legal foundation the Supreme Court previously allowed, based on specific data points the administration presents. Yet it faces intense criticism over its breadth, its fairness, its real-world impact versus its stated security goals.
And the sources suggest legal challenges are coming. Plus, the proclamation itself mandates periodic review, so this isn't necessarily the final word. It's an evolving situation.
Definitely.
Which brings us to a really interesting point, thinking about these clashing views. We've heard the security arguments, the need for cooperation. We've also heard about fairness, the value of openness for families, for science, for understanding.
It really leaves you thinking, and perhaps that's the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over after hearing all this. Considering these different justifications and the sharp criticisms laid out in the sources we've explored, what balance do you think is appropriate? Where should the line be drawn between national security measures aimed at protecting the country and maintaining those open channels needed for legitimate travel, for study, for keeping families connected, and for global engagement.